Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man, I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. As you guys know, we got done with the 6th round of the Altibox Norway chess tournament. So I went ahead and grabbed the Magnus Carlsen versus Shakhriyar Mamedyarov game. It's a pretty nice one. Has some good little concepts in it. You know, for all of my people that are coming from the Philippines, I will say mabuhay to you. Hello, ulit. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Anybody who is coming from Norway, I will say God Morgan, Velkomen, and Tusen Tak for coming by and taking a look at my stuff. Anybody who is from Azerbaijani, I will say salam and Chak Sargol to you. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But if you guys are ready to go, let's take. I'm about to say, if my mouse is ready to go, bro, it wasn't moving. All right, let's go. Knight comes to F3. We see D5. We got G3, G6. Now we start off with the King's Indian attack, but it does transpose over. We see Bishop to G2, Bishop to G7. We see D4. Knight to F6. We got castles, and then C4. And now we do have the Neo-Grünfeld defense. You know, for those of you that, you know, kind of play C4, D4, C4, knight to C3, knight to F6. Without the fianchetto, this should look familiar to you because this is pretty much like the Grünfeld type setup. We do see the C6, so that's kind of Slav looking. We do see knight to C3, pawn takes C4, we got E4. Looking at possibly, you know, pushing our pawn up here. You know, getting a nice pawn center established. So we do see bishop to G4. We got H3. Bishop takes F3. Bishop takes F3. And then we do have E5. You know, we cannot stand to let this just be. I mean, E4, D4 is like White's dream. We have to, you know, combat that somehow. And E5 is the perfect pawn break. We do see pawn takes E5. Knight F to D7. And, I mean, you're going to lose the pawn anyway. You know, of course, in this position, you do not have the time to play F4. So, I mean, just go ahead and just damage black structure a little bit. You know, they're going to either, you're going to either capture here if the knight moves, or they're going to capture and their pawns are going to be a little bit messed up. Pawn takes E6, bishop comes to E3. And then we do see the novelty of the game, which is queen to E7. Super logical move. You know, just getting that queen off the back row, off the back rank. You know, we do kind of have to find a home for this knight. See where it wants to go. So the bishop comes back to G2. We see knight to A6. Queen comes to E2. We see knight to B4. We see queen taking C4. And then we do have knight to C2. And that could be a little bit, you know, a little bit of some trouble because we are forking this bishop and this rook. Magnus Carlsen has a really nice, like, cute little move to play in this position, and it is knight to D5. Uncovering an attack on the knight, but more importantly, we are uncovering, like, we are placing an attack on the queen on E7, and so you do not have time to take on E3 because this knight takes E7 is going to come with check. So that is a very important detail to the situation. So we do see pawn takes D5. Queen takes C2, and then we do have the really nice, you know, D4. You know, we cannot allow pawn to take, bishop to take with check. We're just going to be losing a pawn. We can't do that. So D4 is a perfectly timed move. Bishop comes back to D2. We see rook A to C8, queen to B3, knight to C5, queen to A3. So as you can see, the queen's getting knocked around just a little bit. So it's not the most ideal situation for the queen. We do see queen to D7, rook A to C1. We got B6. Just keeping everything super duper solid. We got E5. E5. That's deep. I literally was looking like, okay, that just throws the pawn away, right? Like, I mean, it's protected on E4. Like, why are we pushing it to E5? Well, because of so. Bishop takes E5. We see rook F to E1. And we are playing against that really weak pawn that we created way earlier. So there is a method to the madness. So Magnus Carlsen will be getting his pawn back coming up soon. The bishop retreats back to G7. We see B4 displacing the knight. You don't have like a whole lot of squares for the knight to go to. You do have queen coming to A4 though, because this queen is undefended. So if you wanted to try to counterattack that way, that would definitely be something. But we do see knight to A4, rook takes C8, and then we do see queen over to B3. And we are just adding a lot of pressure onto this pawn. So the knight comes down to C3. We see rook taking e6. I mean, you could have possibly tried to go rook to e8. But, I mean, you know, you were still going to get the pawn back after rook takes e6. The rook would take, and then the bishop would be making sure that you're getting your exchange back. So we did not see that. Like I said, you know, Shaq just goes ahead and just says, hey, man, go ahead and take the pawn. You're going to get it back at some point. It's kind of like when you play the Queen's Gambit accepted, or, you know, those like pawn takes c4 lines. So we do see rook takes e6. Like I said, king goes over to h8. You know, just get safety. Get into safety. We do see king up to h2. The rook goes over to e8. Rook takes e8. Queen takes e8. We do see queen to c4. We got h6, a3, and we see a5. And I was just thinking, man, it's like, you know what? These players just do not let you breathe. So Shaq is saying, man, don't breathe at all. Like, just be messed up. So we do see pawn taking a5, pawn taking a5. And then we do see bishop down to f1. We got queen over to f8. The king sidesteps over to g2 because this was a very real threat. And then we do have knight up to e4, just renewing the threat on f2. And some of you guys might be wondering, hold on. King goes to g2. Like, isn't this pawn just hanging? Well, the unfortunate thing about that pawn is you are not going to get the pawn. Like, you're going to win the pawn, but you're going to be giving yourself like a really gigantic headache. Just to show you guys an example. Queen taking a3, you see queen coming up to e6, you know, tickling this pawn, and you only really have two different ways to defend it. There's either king down, or there's going to be g5. King down automatically is going to be bishop to c4, or even bishop to d3, and that's going to be pretty lights out. And so, you know, one of the few things you can do is push g5. You do see h4, pawn takes h4, bishop comes up to c4 anyway. Queen goes back to f8 trying to defend, and then the bishop comes to f4, and this is just horribly lost. I mean, the bishop is going to be coming here, so you either trade here with a check, or you take here, queen takes back, or even king. You know, you are just getting sliced and diced on these light squares. So that pawn was technically poisoned, so don't do that. So like I said, knight came to e4. We saw the bishop retreating back to e1, just defending. And now queen takes a3. It's a definite different position in this particular case because the knight has come back. So you don't have, you know, the diagonal is a little bit more pinned, not pinned, closed up for white. So we do see bishop to d3. Knight comes back to d6, attacking the queen. We do see queen to a6. Knight comes to f5. So as you can see, the knight has done a really good job of kind of plugging things up. We do see h4. We got h5. Bishop takes a5. King goes to h7. Queen goes to b5. We do see queen back to f8. We got queen over to d5. We see queen to d6, offering a trade, which is definitely beneficial for white, by the way. You could have definitely gone into that. You're pretty much just trading down. You know, no harm, no foul. We do see queen down to f3. Queen goes to e5. We see bishop up to d8. The queen goes to e6. We see queen to b7. So, I mean, we're kind of starting to work something up a little bit. I mean, these bishops are actually really, really strong. Kind of slicing and dicing their way through the position. If I could draw an arrow, son. And this queen is definitely doing some good work over here on b7, pinning the bishop. So we do see knight to d6, queen comes to d6. We do see queen down to b3, and we have reached a point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and see what Magnus Carlsen plays in this position, go ahead and do so. Okay, so, you know, I think what I'm going to have to start doing with y'all, because y'all are getting really good at this guess the move thing. I'm going to have to start picking like the most boring, like random move. Like, guess the first move of the game. Like, if you want to take 5 seconds to guess the first move, go ahead and do so. Like, I'm going to have to do that because, like, when I pause the video and a lot of these times, I mean, you guys are looking for the really explosive moves, which is good because, I mean, you're going to do that in your games and you're probably going to mess around and beat some folks. But the move is bishop takes g6 with check. You know, for those of you that noticed, You know, this bishop is undefended at the moment. So, I mean, you're attacking the knight. It's attacking here. So it's like, hey, man, I'm going to get me a pawn in the process. So the bishop does take g6. We see king taking g6. We got queen taking d6 with check. King going to h7. The queen goes to d7. And then we do see king back down to g6. And you really want to be careful in this position because you don't want to go queen to g8 because this is just horribly lost after bishop to f6. The king would try to, like, you know, step out of the way, but you can actually just trade down into a completely favorable endgame. After the bishop takes and then the queen takes, the king would be taking back up here, and then you are creeping your king out. And you are going to be collecting this pawn, and you just have a 3-to-1 pawn majority, which is not winnable at all. So, like I said, we did see king down to g6. We see queen to c6 with check. The king goes up to f7. We see queen to c5. Queen comes up to b7 with check. But, I mean, that just kind of helps us, you know, push one of our pawns forward. And so we just got to make sure this pawn doesn't go anywhere. But we do have that 3-to-1 majority I was talking about earlier. So the king goes back to e8. We see bishop to c7. Just completely, like, laterally just, like, cutting the queen out of the game, basically. And then so we do see the check on b2. The king steps up in its third rank Luft. And then we do see d3. We see queen taking h5 with check. The king comes down to d7. We see queen to f7 with check. The king goes down to c6. And he doesn't actually even give Magnus Carlsen the ability to move. He goes ahead and resigns in this position that you see here. And he basically resigns because, I mean, there are a couple of different moves you can play in this position. I mean, you can retreat bishop back to f4. You can play queen to c4. But the one that he was probably thinking about the most is actually queen to c4 with check. And this is just the perfect move because in conjunction with bishop to f4, you are stopping this pawn from queening. And I'll just give you an example variation. The king would step back up to d7. Bishop would come back to f4. You do want to kind of trade because if you can trade on this square, the bishop would actually be holding this square and you will force this bishop to give itself up. But the only thing is, at the end of the day, you have 3 pawns against this bishop, so you might even just win that endgame. But so, of course, you don't trade. You just go queen to d5 with check. The king would step over to e7. We got h5. Bishop would come to d4, probably, you know, just in a last-ditch effort to try to disconnect this queen like you did, you know, Magnus did to Shaq earlier. We would see h6, d2. Bishop would come to g5 with check. The king would come up to f8. And you would see h7, and you are threatening checkmate on g8. So that is just a sample variation. Like I said, that didn't happen. We had this position. And Shaq just went ahead and said, I'm going to throw the towel in, man. This is not a position that I want to continue to play. And who can blame him? I mean, it's the world champion you're playing, man. So, I mean, don't test his gangster because he has shown time and time again that he's gangster enough. So that is that game. I appreciate you guys very much for coming by. Chak said go to my people coming from Azerbaijan. Tusen tak for anybody coming from Norway. Merming salamat aking makaibigan. Hanggang sa muli. Ingat lagi mabuting pagbati. And I will see you guys next time.